Hey all you literary legends and luminaries, I'm Julie, and today's episode of Booksmart deals with an issue that doesn't get as much attention as it should. The book for today is Children of the State, Stories of Survival and Hope in the Juvenile Justice System by Jeff Hobbs. This is a personal issue for me because I teach at a juvenile detention center. When I first started there 8 years ago, I read as many books as I could find regarding JDCs and youth incarceration. I was surprised that there wasn't much out there, even less regarding the educational aspect. A few memoirs exist about those who have been in juvenile detention and have ended up in prison. Most of these stories are successful ones, minus the gang members who publish books from prison. I found a few that are from the correctional officer's point of view. Those are eye-opening, depressing, and accurate based on what I've seen and experienced firsthand. And sometimes books like Just Mercy hint at such matters, referencing the school-to-prison pipeline. When I found Hobbs' book and read on the cover flap that he writes about the challenges educators face in juvenile detention programs, I didn't hesitate and bought it, even though I try never to buy brand new copies of hardback books because they're astronomically expensive. Let me start by reading the quote that actually begins the book. It was written in 1921 by Judge Charles W. Hoffman, speaking to the first conference on juvenile court standards. It was the evident purpose of the founders of the first juvenile courts to save, to redeem, and to protect every delinquent child for the benefit of himself and of society and of the state. If these principles are not applied to the juvenile court, the result will be that in the future, as in the past, distressed children, broken in body and mind, must travel along the trail of tears that leads finally to their destruction. So why should you care? Because those broken children, when they self-destruct, can leave a large path of destruction behind. Yet society isn't all that interested in healing children who end up arrested. Many of these teenagers deserve to be at JDC for the choices they've made and the hurt they've caused, no question about it. Perhaps we need to look at more of how such children and teenagers end up making such choices or being involved in illegal activity in the first place. That's the part we ignore. Yet we have made improvements, but they're not working. The system is horribly broken. Between the Department of Social Services, school districts, and the courts, we are not solving the problem. So listen to what Hobbs writes. The local numbers suggested that despite improving conditions and programs, children were still far more likely than adults to be reincarcerated within 3 years of release, up to 84% by some estimates. The system had been redesigned dozens of times over hundreds of years and always produced the same relentless results. I commend Hobbs for taking on a relatively untrending topic, is that even a word, untrending, and trying to make it accessible for the common reader, one who doesn't work with troubled youth, one who isn't part of the system. The book is divided into 3 parts. One deals with a JDC in Delaware that follows Josiah, an incarcerated student. The second deals with another JDC, this one in San Francisco, from the point of view of the teachers. And the third is a program in New York City that is completed as part of a probation program, which follows Ian, a student. Josiah starts in a facility that houses nonviolent offenders. 2 days after he's released, he's charged with assault and destruction of property. So off he goes to JDC. This is the part I think Hobbs covers well. From Josiah's point of view, we get to see that on day 2 of being out in the free world, he's easily irritated. He's mad that he has to wait 45 minutes for his probation officer, who doesn't apologize for his tardiness. So Josiah just up and leaves on the 3rd day and then gets arrested for assault. You just want to shake sense into these teenagers. I've had a student get released on Monday during school. Tuesday morning when I return to work, that student's already back at JDC. It's completely the student's fault for making such decisions, yet what does that say about our system of justice? More importantly, what does that say about the society in which we live? Josiah has witnessed 3 deaths by the time he's 16. Think about that. Death is a normal part of life, but witnessing 3 deaths, violent deaths, before you're 20? The problem starts long before the child ends up in JDC. While we say we know this, we don't do much to thwart such problems. Hobbs takes us through Josiah's routines and such while he's incarcerated. Not much happens, which surprised me. I could tell some horror stories, so I was baffled that nothing out of the ordinary happened. Hobbs' storytelling is a bit tiring at times. Scenes are created with tedious details and dialogue that doesn't always seem to go anywhere. I know he's painting a picture for us and trying to showcase the day-to-day existence of students there, but it's a bit much at times. Josiah is smart and can easily graduate, but he drags his feet. I've witnessed that 1,000 times. From Josiah's perspective, it's neat to see how he feels about it. He doesn't want to be signaled out for having potential. Isn't that the opposite of what we'd expect? Just like every other teenager in the world, everywhere, he wants to fit in. And since most students at JDC are so far behind and will probably get transferred or released in X amount of time, most students are not going to graduate while they're incarcerated. Josiah doesn't watch such expectations on him, and he doesn't want to get teased for being smart, for having potential. In my 8 years at JDC, we've only had 2 get their diploma and 1 get his GED. We should have had at least a dozen more, but they dawdle. Now I have a little more insight. And then COVID hits, which I hate reading about. In 20 to 30 years, such COVID descriptions of the shutdowns will be historically relevant, but I just don't want to read about it when we lived through it not too long ago. I wonder if the story's outcomes would have altered much had COVID not happened. The second part focuses on the teachers in a facility in San Francisco. Hobbs describes the toll teaching at JDC takes on the teachers, how the continual student deaths affect them, how the lack of resources wears them out, how they're always battling for something. This particular school was slated to close in 2 years, so a committee was formed to figure out how to cover education, with, of course, little input from the school. This facility, which on average has about 30 students at a time, even though probably around 300 students come in and out of the facility each year, is comparable to where I teach. Yet it has 8 teachers, a principal, and counselors/registrars at the facility. One of their teachers was even a cinema studies teacher of all things. I'm the only full-time teacher at my JDC. Even though I'm technically the English teacher, I'm responsible for all subjects but math. The math teacher only teaches in the morning. Our SPED teacher comes 4 times a week for 1 or 2 hours. My supervisor's at another school. I have no aide. I'm the one who has to track down student transcripts and figure out what they need to graduate, although I have had 0 counseling training. I struggled to read this section of the book because the teachers talked of being overwhelmed and exhausted, which most teachers are overworked. But I wanted to trade places with them since they only dealt with about 5 students at a time and only had to focus on their subject area. Sounds like a dream to me. Personal feelings aside, readers will see the insanity that occurs within the bureaucracies that run these facilities. Because the library has to be staffed by a certified librarian, the students only have access to the library and its books a couple of hours a week. I have no words to describe this. At my JDC, I'm also the makeshift librarian. JDC has tons of books for students, but the students prefer the books in my school library. With not many options for entertainment, students at JDC read more than the average student in the free world simply because they have nothing else to do. They certainly don't have smartphones. And yet some idiotic administrator in the San Francisco JDC has put forth rules that result in students having severely limited access to books. And then COVID hits, well, the library is closed. What is wrong with our thinking? When the shutdowns happened, the teachers worked remotely like everywhere else on earth, but their students didn't really do schoolwork because JDC was so fearful about internet use. So without the teachers there, school didn't really happen. The teachers and principals exhausted themselves coming up with alternatives, but once again, hit dead ends. The district said it was too expensive to get the appropriate technology, etc., etc., etc. I was fortunate. The JDC staff brought the students out for school and let them work online. We gave the staff access to our laptops so they could monitor the students' internet use. But this is something I don't think the layperson realizes, especially with our reliance on the internet for absolutely everything. JDC students can't have unfiltered access to the internet. They can't even watch the local news for fear they'll see themselves or their friends on it. Sometimes there'll be no contact orders from the judge, so students can't have access to email. It adds yet another mitigating factor into teaching and learning in such facilities. And finally, the last section of the book deals with a program in New York City whose building is in the hoity-toity part of Manhattan, if that makes any sense. Ian gets himself into trouble after a gang-related incident, although it wasn't really gang-related. This was also fascinating to me. He and his friends call themselves a gang, but it's not like they initiate anyone or go around partaking in criminal activities, yet the confession he signed from the police says he's the leader of this gang. And because the group they fought were minorities, it was deemed racially charged. The discrepancy between the adults' view of what happened versus the teenagers' view of what happened is mind-boggling. For reasons that I can't make sense of, Ian can't go back home, so he has to live with his aunt and uncle and sleep on their couch. The program lasts for many months, so imagine that. It's like we're setting up paroled children to fail. The program Ian has to participate in is like a work training program. Although they earn diplomas, they focus on work-related stuff. And get this, after they've been in the program long enough, they get paid for coming to school. I don't know how I feel about that. Ian starts coming late, skipping, which then doesn't that violate the conditions of his parole? But why am I even questioning this? So many of my students who get released are supposed to attend school but don't. I won't spoil the ending of Ian's story for you. Ultimately, this book will give you a glimpse into what is happening with students who have been or are currently incarcerated. And what you learn from this book is not pleasant and may shock you if you are unfamiliar with the topic. Is it the best book I've read on the subject? Not at all. Hobbs' writing is more like a fly on the wall approach, which could be a good thing since he doesn't inject his opinion. I can't even stay focused on this book review because I have so many opinions on the subject. Yet by operating just as an observer, I don't feel close to the action. I'm watching it play out, but I don't feel a part of it, even with my personal experience in such matters. I don't know if I care enough about the people in the story because his writing hasn't impacted me enough. Maybe I'm just jaded. Even with the arduous details, he seems to leave other critical information out. With such a small sampling of students observed, the reader won't get the full picture. In my classroom, I can have a fifth grader. Yes, a fifth grader, sometimes even a fourth grader, in the same classroom with 17-year-olds. I can have a student who receives all his education in a self-contained classroom, yet when he comes to JDC, he's in a classroom with 15 other students, and I have no additional school support to meet his educational needs. Hobbs doesn't always give us that bigger picture, yet the details he does give us don't always seem significant. He could have easily cut 100 pages from the book, and I don't think it would have mattered. Also, the point of view he used was a bit confusing. If you're going to focus on education, why not do a more omniscient viewpoint with both students and teachers from 3 different facilities? Following around Josiah with his JDC education, but not developing much outside of school time seemed like an odd narrative choice. And I don't know if he captured the school's relationship with the staff at JDC because that in and of itself is a story. However, I'm still going to commend Hobbs for attempting to bring the topic of juvenile justice into mainstream reading. What is more important than helping children who are at risk and don't have any resources? This affects everyone. The best way to stop crime is not keeping criminals locked up, it's stopping criminal behavior before it starts. And why this topic receives so little attention, I just don't understand. I've seen more headlines recently about flyers usurping other people's seats and expecting that the person who reserved that window or aisle seat is just going to say, okay, you can sit in my seat. Yet that sense of selfishness and entitlement, I guess, fits right into the topic at hand. We get up in arms about girl plate and social studies curriculum and trigger warnings. Maybe we should use some of that energy on figuring out how all children in the U.S., especially those in poverty-stricken areas, and especially those children of color and children suffering with mental and emotional problems, can have a stable, safe childhood so that they can grow up to be stable adults in a safer world. Thanks for watching. My goal at Booksmart is to get a little bit smarter, one book at a time.